It was a cold Tuesday evening when the call came in. A neighbor, concerned about strange noises coming from the apartment across the street. The kind of call that seemed routine at first. A little too quiet. A door left ajar. But what happened next would turn everything upside down. Luke Carter, 29 years old, was a man of few words. Quiet. Private. He lived in a modest apartment building, nestled in the middle of a busy city block. Nothing about his life stood out, until he vanished. No goodbye. No warning. Just empty space where there used to be life. And a question: where did Luke go? Ellie Reynolds, his neighbor, was the one to notice first. She had lived next door for over a year, and in that time, she'd watched him more than she cared to admit. Luke was predictable, leaving for work every morning at exactly 8:03 a.m., always coming home by 6 p.m., always silent. But tonight was different. It was 8:20 p.m. when Ellie saw Luke's apartment light flicker. The shadows in the window shifted strangely. She didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was watching TV or playing a late game of chess. But when the lights suddenly went out, Ellie's curiosity got the best of her. She watched from the darkened window of her apartment across the hall, her eyes drawn to the now dark window of Luke's. It was strange. Too strange. He had always been a creature of routine. Ellie waited for a few minutes before she decided to call him. No answer. Not unusual. He didn't always pick up the phone. But when she dialed again, something felt off. The apartment door, she noticed, was slightly ajar, just a crack. Her instinct kicked in. She didn't know why, but something in her gut told her to go check. When Ellie knocked on Luke's door, there was no answer. She knocked again, harder this time, but still, nothing. A cold wind rushed past her, sending a shiver up her spine. Her heart pounded as she carefully pushed the door open. It creaked. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The living room was in disarray, papers scattered, books knocked over. The air was stale, as if no one had been there for hours. But that wasn't what stopped her dead in her tracks. There was a figure in the dark corner of the room. Not Luke, but someone else. A shadowed silhouette standing motionless by the window, staring out into the night. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back, slowly, her mind racing. The figure didn't move. That's when she saw it, Luke's wallet, left open on the counter. The silhouette turned toward her, and just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished into the night. Ellie couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. She backed out of the apartment, her heart racing. A flood of questions filled her mind. Was that Luke? Was someone else in the apartment? What had just happened? The next day, Ellie went to the police. Detective Claire Simmons was assigned to the case. After listening to Ellie's account, she didn't dismiss it. The situation seemed like something more than a missing persons case. The more they investigated, the stranger the situation became. Luke had never been reported missing. His bank account was untouched. There were no signs of forced entry. But most importantly, his neighbors, who had seen him just hours before, swore they had seen no one leave his apartment. But the security footage told another story. The building's cameras had caught a figure slipping out of the building at exactly 9:05 p.m., the time Ellie had noticed the strange figure at the window. The footage was blurry, but one thing was clear: the person walking out wasn't Luke. Detective Simmons paused the video. "That's not Luke," she muttered under her breath. "Who the hell is that?" By morning, Luke Carter's disappearance had become official. Detective Claire Simmons stood inside Luke's apartment, scanning every detail Ellie had described the night before. The room felt staged, messy in places that didn't make sense, untouched in others. A chair knocked over, but the TV remote placed neatly on the table. Papers scattered, but no broken glass. No forced entry. Luke hadn't fought. He'd been interrupted. What about enemies? Claire asked Ellie quietly. Ellie shook her head. He barely spoke to anyone. That's why it scared me. He was invisible. That word stuck with Claire. Invisible people didn't usually vanish by accident. The building's security footage was reviewed again, frame by frame. At 8:57 p.m., Luke entered the building alone. At 9:05 p.m., someone else exited, hood up, head down, moving calmly. No rush. No panic. The person knew exactly where the cameras were. But the strangest detail came next. At 9:11 p.m., another movement appeared on camera. Someone stood behind the glass door of Luke's apartment, motionless, watching the hallway. Claire froze the frame. "That's inside the apartment," she said. After the suspect left. Which meant Ellie hadn't imagined the silhouette. Someone stayed behind. Forensics confirmed Luke's phone had been used after his disappearance, but not to call anyone. The screen had been unlocked, opened, then locked again. No messages sent. No calls made. Just checked. As if someone wanted to make sure something hadn't changed. Then Claire learned something that shifted the case. Luke had complained to management 2 weeks earlier. He believed someone was entering his apartment when he wasn't home. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved, except small things. The blinds. Always adjusted. Claire felt a chill. Someone wasn't breaking in, she said. They were already watching him. Ellie was asked to walk Claire through the building. As they passed each apartment door, Ellie slowed near one. "This one," she said quietly. Across from Luke's. It belonged to Mark Allison. A tenant no one really noticed. Mid-40s. Worked nights. Curtains always closed. Claire checked the records. Mark's keycard had been used twice that night. Once to enter. Once to exit, at 9:14 p.m. 3 minutes after the silhouette was seen inside Luke's apartment. Claire stared at the timestamp. 3 minutes was all it took. When officers knocked on Mark Allison's door that evening, there was no answer. Inside, they found a clean apartment. No clutter. No photos. No personal items on display. Except one thing. A pair of binoculars on the windowsill, pointed directly at Luke's apartment. And beside them, a notebook. Filled with dates. Times. Notes. Lights off early. Visitor unknown. Door unlocked. And on the final page, written neatly, "Tonight." Claire closed the notebook slowly. They hadn't been dealing with a random crime. They had been dealing with someone watching. Waiting. And now, they just needed to find him, before he realized the one person who never looked away had finally seen him too. The apartment felt like it was holding its breath. Detective Claire Simmons stared through the blinds at Mark Allison's door, knowing everything would come to a head tonight. He had no idea the walls were closing in on him. The binoculars on his windowsill, the notebook filled with meticulous detail, it was clear he'd been waiting for someone to notice. But he didn't expect Ellie to be the one watching. It was late when Claire and her team approached Mark's apartment. The hallway was eerily quiet, the low hum of the building's ventilation the only sound. Claire had no illusions about Mark's innocence. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a random event. Mark had been watching Luke for weeks, maybe longer. Every small detail, every moment he had spent peeking into the life of his neighbor, had been building up to this. And now, it was time to confront him. When the door opened, it wasn't Mark who answered. It was a woman. Young. Pale. Nervous. Her eyes widened at the sight of Claire and the officers standing behind her. I don't know anything about anything," the woman stammered, backing away. "Please, I'm not involved." Claire's heart sank. "Where's Mark?" The woman hesitated before stepping aside. "He's not here. He went out for a bit." It didn't take long to find Mark's hiding spot. He was in the closet, half hidden behind a stack of boxes, his eyes wide with panic. "Mark Allison," Claire said calmly, her voice steady but forceful. "We need to talk." He didn't resist. Inside, the full story began to unfold. Mark had never been a random neighbor. He had been stalking Luke for months. But it wasn't just about curiosity, it was obsession. Mark had lived in the building for almost 2 years but had never once tried to speak to Luke. Instead, he observed from a distance, using the binoculars to watch every move. But when Luke started to notice the small things out of place, lights moved, blinds adjusted, Mark became desperate. He wanted control. The confession came easily once Mark realized there was no way out. "I just wanted to know why he was so perfect," Mark muttered, his voice quiet and hoarse. Everything in his life seemed so easy, so smooth. I thought if I could get close enough, I could understand it. But I was always too scared to talk to him. So I watched. Claire's gut twisted. The horror wasn't in the act of watching, it was in how Mark had convinced himself that it was harmless. I thought if I could just know him, maybe my life would make sense too, Mark continued. But when he started locking his door, and the blinds stayed down, I thought, maybe he knew I was watching him. It was that fear, that realization, that had pushed him too far. He didn't just want to watch anymore. He wanted to control Luke, to make him feel the same fear he felt. And when Luke had begun locking his doors, Mark's obsession grew into something darker. He had poisoned Luke's food, just a little at first, to get his attention, to create an opening. But when Luke died, Mark's plan fell apart. The arrest was quiet. There were no protests. No dramatic confessions. Mark just slumped against the wall, broken. The case closed with little fanfare. Mark Ellison was charged with first-degree murder and stalking. His trial didn't last long. His defense was weak, his motives clear. The evidence against him was overwhelming. And yet, despite the conviction, Detective Claire Simmons couldn't shake the feeling that something else had been at play. Weeks later, Claire stood at her window, looking out at the city. Her thoughts wandered back to that night, to the neighbor watching from the window. She understood now. Some people watch because they don't know how to live. The door locked from the inside wasn't just about a crime. It was about the silence that surrounded it. About the disturbing stillness in a life that had been watched for far too long. The case was over, but Claire knew one thing for certain. In a world full of watchers, sometimes the most dangerous person is the one who's been watching you all along. And in the end, some doors, no matter how tightly they're locked, have a way of opening.